Canada's Auditor General says a failure of management and some of the worst financial record-keeping she has ever seen drastically drove up the cost of the ArriveCan app. Karen Hogan estimates the app cost roughly $59.5 million, but Ms. Hogan also says that the management of the project was so poor, it's impossible to know the final amount for sure. The first ArriveCan contract was initially valued at $2.35 million. And joining us now to discuss those skyrocketing costs is Dr. Jay Goldberg, Ontario Director for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Jay, thank you very much for joining us.
Great to be with you.
As a group representing taxpayers, I mean, what was your reaction to the overall cost of ArriveCan?
I mean, it's shocking. Look, we knew this was bad, but the Auditor General report, there's no other word for it than shocking. If you look at the overall cost, it went from originally in its inception supposed to be somewhere around $80,000, went all the way up to almost $60 million. The fact that the Auditor General herself said she can't even give an exact figure because there's not enough receipts, there's not enough record keeping. I mean, if this was done in the private sector and anywhere other than government, whoever was involved in this project would be completely fired. And so we're in a situation where we need to see accountability and we need to see reform so that something like this never happens again.
Walk us through how exactly we got here. From your view, how did the cost balloon so significantly to that nearly 60 million figure?
Well, just so many different contracts, so many different balls were moving here, and it just seems like a lot of sweetheart deals, to be honest. There's a lot of questions that need to be asked here. A lot of firms that were contracted out, and I think the leader of the opposition, Pierre Poilievre, raises some legitimate concerns about how many different groups were connected to this. I mean, we had a situation where a couple of teenagers spent Thanksgiving weekend replicating this app, and they did it within a weekend. And so if that could have been done, you really have to ask yourself, how in the world did we get to a cost of $60 million for something that, as you mentioned, should have costed really at the most a couple $1 million was the original estimate. So how do you balloon all the way to 60 million? And clearly people were taking advantage of this process. We know that there was over $350,000 paid out in bonuses to the government employees who worked on this. So, I mean, it's absolutely shocking. There needs to be accountability. We haven't seen any accountability from those working for the government, and we haven't seen any accountability from the government itself.
And now Canada's public safety minister has suggested that part of the mismanagement was a result of the pandemic. They were obviously complicated times. What do you make of that reasoning?
Look, it's not a get out of jail free card just because, it was a complicated time in government. But what I would say is that the government has used that justification for so many different things. We know that the CERB program, for example, people were having payments go out, not just weeks, but months, if not years, past when they shouldn't have been eligible. We know that the program spiraled out of control. And again, we saw the government blame the pandemic. You know, in the first few weeks of the pandemic, yes, this was a complete shock. You know, it wasn't something that we were all prepared for. The government perhaps could be forgiven in the first number of weeks for rushing things out the door, getting things done. But this was not something that was like the app was not something that was part of the very first part of the pandemic. It was, it was being created over a period of time. And the period of time where it was created was not really this crunch period where you didn't know we were going through a pandemic and didn't know that, we had plans going forward. And so what I would say is that the government's excuse is completely baseless, and it's just a sorry excuse they seem to use for everything.
Now, Tory leader Pierre Poilievre has argued that Ottawa needs to reduce its reliance on outside contractors. What do you make of that proposal? We have about 45 seconds here before we go to the break.
Yeah, I mean, well, look at the numbers. The number of people working for the government today, the federal government, is 40% more than it was in 2015. If we've hired all those people to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, Surely to goodness, there should be people already employed by the federal government who could do this and don't need to have contracts out. So what we need to do is two things. These outside contracts have to go unless they're completely justified. And the other thing is the size of the government, those working for the government, has to be shrunk significantly.
Jay, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.